Crazy ex-mill shows up at my door on the day of my wedding demanding for answers and closure for her poor man-child of a son who tormented me for years, but I refused to say anything except make this one call for her. Now she's crying BC her actions have consequences and she's facing them by becoming single and miserable like her son too. My wedding day would turn into such a circus. It was supposed to be the day of my dreams, the day I would finally move on from all the chaos that had marked my previous relationship. But of course, just as I was about to close one chapter and start a new one, my past decided to show up in the most dramatic way possible, right at my doorstep demanding answers. So I met my ex-husband, let's call him Tom, 30 male, 8 years ago. He was charming, funny, and seemed like the perfect gentleman. We hit it off immediately and started dating. For the first year, everything was blissful. He showered me with attention, took me on romantic dates, and even introduced me to his family. His mother, Karen, 55 female, was overly affectionate from the start, constantly hugging me and calling me her future daughter-in-law. Looking back, I should have seen the red flags. Not long after that, we were married. It all happened very quickly, almost too quick to be honest. The deeper I got into the relationship, the more I realized how much Tom relied on his mother, Karen, for everything. I didn't think much of it at first. After all, some people are close to their parents, right? But Tom wasn't just close to Karen, he was completely dependent on her. She coddled him, excused his every mistake and seemed to enable his worst tendencies. And as much as I wanted to believe it was just a phase, it became clear that this was who Tom truly was, a man-child who had no intention of growing up. As our relationship progressed, Tom's true colors started to show. He became possessive, constantly questioning my whereabouts and who I was talking to. He'd go through my phone when I wasn't looking and accuse me of cheating if I so much as smiled at a waiter. I tried to rationalize his behavior, telling myself he was just insecure and needed reassurance. Our relationship started to crumble as I found myself taking on more and more responsibility. While I was working hard to build a career and a life for us, Tom spent his days lounging around, barely holding on to a part-time job. He was always too tired to contribute to anything meaningful, and whenever I tried to talk to him about his lack of effort, he'd brush it off with a joke and get defensive. But it didn't stop there. Tom started isolating me from my friends and family. He'd throw tantrums if I wanted to go out with my girlfriends or visit my parents. He claimed that since we were in a relationship, I should prioritize him above everyone else. Slowly but surely, I found myself losing touch with the people I cared about. The emotional manipulation was relentless. If I ever disagreed with him or stood up for myself, he'd guilt-trip me saying things like, "If you really love me, you'd understand, or you're being selfish. Don't you care about my feelings?" He'd give me the silent treatment for days, making me feel like I was walking on eggshells in my own home. Karen, of course, was always there to defend her poor baby. She would tell me that Tom was just going through a rough patch, that he needed time and that I shouldn't be so hard on him. She would make excuses for him, saying that he was sensitive and creative, as if that somehow justified his behavior. She enabled his behavior at every turn. Whenever I tried to confide in her about Tom's actions, she dismissed my concern, saying, "That's just how men are, dear. You need to be more understanding." In her eyes, Tom could do no wrong, and anyone who dared criticize him, especially me, was the enemy. I tolerated this for far longer than I should have. I convinced myself that things would get better, that Tom would eventually grow up and that Karen would back off. But things only got worse. Tom's lack of ambition combined with Karen's constant interference became unbearable. Anytime I tried to set boundaries with Karen, she would guilt-trip me, saying that I didn't understand how hard Tom had it and that I should be more supportive. The breaking point came 3 years into our relationship. I had landed a promotion at work, something I had been working towards for months. When I excitedly told Tom, instead of being happy for me, he flew into a rage. He accused me of prioritizing my career over our relationship and claimed that I was trying to emasculate him by earning more money. In his fury, he threw my phone against the wall, shattering it to pieces. That was the moment I realized I couldn't do this anymore. The next day, while Tom was at work, I packed my bags and left. I blocked his number and moved in with a friend. I filed for divorce, which, let me tell you, is a whole other story. It wasn't easy, but I knew it was necessary for my own well-being. The aftermath was brutal. Tom bombarded me with messages from different numbers, alternating between begging me to come back and threatening me. Karen showed up at my friend's place, which I still don't know how, causing a scene and demanding I give her son another chance. I had to get a restraining order against both of them. It took time, but I slowly rebuilt my life. I reconnected with friends and family, focused on my career, and started therapy to heal from the emotional trauma. 2 years after leaving Tom, I met David, 29 male. He was responsible and kind, and most importantly, he had his life together. David and I dated for a year before he proposed. Throughout our relationship, he's been nothing but understanding about my past. He's encouraged me to pursue my dreams and has been my rock through the ups and downs of life. When he got down on one knee and asked me to marry him, I didn't hesitate to say yes. Everything was going smoothly with the wedding preparations until Karen showed up. Everything was perfect. The venue was beautiful and I felt at peace as I got ready for the ceremony. The entire day had gone smoothly until I heard a loud knock on the door of my bridal suite. At first, I thought it was my maid of honor, but when the door opened, it was Karen. Seeing her standing there looking wild-eyed and furious was a shock. I hadn't seen her since the day I left Tom, and it was like being pulled back into a nightmare. I thought I had escaped. Karen immediately started accusing me of ruining Tom's life, calling me a traitor and claiming that I had left him broken and that I had no right to be happy while he was suffering. Her words were harsh and filled with the same manipulative tone I had grown so used to during my time with Tom. She blamed me for everything, insisting that I had destroyed her family by walking away without giving Tom the closure he supposedly needed. In her mind, I was still responsible for his well-being even after all this. I was speechless. Here she was on the day of my wedding demanding closure for her son, a man who had tormented me for years with his laziness and dishonesty. I couldn't believe the audacity. As she continued to rant, it became clear that Karen hadn't changed at all. She had that deeply unhealthy attachment to Tom, refusing to see him for what he was, an adult who had made his own choices. Instead, she saw me as the villain and she was determined to confront me on my wedding day of all days. Her presence there felt surreal, like a bad dream, but I knew I couldn't let her ruin this moment for me. I had come too far to let Karen drag me back into the toxicity I had worked so hard to escape. I tried to calm her down and told her that she needed to leave right at that moment, but she wasn't having it. She pushed her way inside, ignoring my protests, and started ranting about how I had ruined Tom's life, how he had never been the same since I left him, and how it was all my fault. She claimed that Tom had been heartbroken for years and that he needed closure to move on. I couldn't help but laugh at the absurdity of it all. Heartbroken. Tom had been heartbroken for years. This was the same man who had barely lifted a finger to contribute to our relationship, who had lied to me and taken advantage of me at every turn. And now, suddenly, I was supposed to feel guilty for leaving him. I didn't respond to Karen's accusations. There was no point in engaging. Instead, I picked up my phone and called the authorities. There had been a restraining order in place after I left Tom because Karen had refused to leave me alone. She had shown up at my friend's place, sent countless messages, and tried to involve herself in my life even after I had made it clear that I wanted no contact. The restraining order was necessary for my safety, and now Karen had violated it by showing up at my wedding uninvited. Once I made the call, Karen seemed to realize what was happening. Her confidence faltered, and she started backing away, trying to justify her actions. She claimed she was only there to help Tom, that he deserved closure, and that I owed it to him. But it didn't matter anymore. Karen's obsession with keeping Tom dependent on her had only resulted in more chaos, and I wasn't going to allow her to drag me into it again. The police would handle it from here. Within minutes, security showed up with the cops and escorted Karen off the property. Karen was all over the place. One moment she was begging me to listen, and the other she was threatening me that I will regret this. She called me a cheater, insisting that I must have been unfaithful to Tom during our marriage. She went as far as claiming that I had stolen money from them, that I had ruined Tom's life for my own selfish gain. Her accusations grew wilder and more outrageous with each passing second. At one point, she even screamed that I had been plotting this entire wedding just to spite her and Tom, as if my happiness was some kind of twisted revenge. It was a scene I couldn't have imagined in my worst nightmares. I glanced around the room and saw my new relatives, many of whom had never met Karen or Tom, watching in stunned silence. Some of them looked at me with pity, others with judgment, unsure of what to make of the chaos unfolding before them. The embarrassment washed over me in waves. This was supposed to be the happiest day of my life, and yet here I was standing in the middle of a scene so absurd that I could hardly believe it was real. Thankfully, David came to my rescue. With a calm but commanding presence, he asked everyone for their attention. He apologized for the interruption, explaining that this was an unfortunate situation with someone who had no place in our lives anymore. He quickly shifted the mood in the room. People began to focus on him rather than the spectacle of Karen being escorted out in handcuffs. In that moment, I was so grateful for his ability to protect me from further humiliation. After Karen had been removed and things started to settle down, I pulled David aside and apologized. I felt awful that this had happened on our wedding day and that his family and friends had been subjected to this drama because of my past. But David, being the understanding man he is, didn't judge me for a second. He had known everything about Karen and Tom long before this day, and he had never once blamed me for the madness they brought into my life. He assured me that none of this was my fault and that we would get through it together as we always had. It was a moment of relief knowing that I wasn't alone in facing this chaos, and David's love and support hadn't wavered for a moment. Despite his reassurances, I didn't feel any emotion except anger for Karen. Over the years, she had done everything in her power to manipulate, control, and belittle me. And now, even on my wedding day, she had found a way to intrude and try to sabotage my happiness. It was clear to me that Karen would never change. She would always cling to her delusions, always try to cast me as the villain in her twisted narrative. I had enough. I decided right then and there that this was going to become a legal matter. I couldn't keep allowing her to insert herself into my life even from a distance. The restraining order wasn't enough anymore. I needed to make sure she faced the consequences of her actions in a more permanent way. However, in the days that followed, I got pretty serious news from old relatives, mostly from Tom's side. They told me that Karen had been sick for a long time and that she had been showing signs of mental instability in recent years. They insisted that she wasn't well and that her behavior at the wedding was just another symptom of her declining mental health. They begged me to reconsider pressing charges, saying that Karen didn't know what she was doing and that she wasn't the same person she used to be. This left me feeling confused. While Tom and I were married, Karen had seemed perfectly fine. She had been controlling and manipulative, but I never saw any signs of true mental illness. Her actions had always seemed calculated, not the result of some underlying health issue. And this wasn't the first time she had acted out like this. When I separated from Tom, she had gone haywire in much the same way, trying to force her way back into my life, making wild accusations and refusing to respect my boundaries. It made me wonder whether these claims of her mental illness were just another way for people to excuse her behavior. Now I don't know what to believe. On one hand, if Karen is truly unwell, it feels wrong to push forward with legal action against her. But on the other hand, her behavior has been so destructive and I don't want to risk her continuing to interfere in my life. There's also the part of me that wonders whether these stories about her mental state are just another manipulation, an attempt by her or those close to her to avoid responsibility. I've been through so much with Karen and Tom, and I'm tired of being the one who has to clean up the mess they leave behind. I really want to take my share of action against her, but I know that I won't get the best reaction from some of my friends and family who think that I could have handled the situation in a better manner instead of calling the cops on my ex-mother-in-law. So, Reddit, I turn to you for advice now. Am I the one at fault for calling the police on my ex-mother-in-law on my wedding day and considering pressing charges against her despite claims of her mental instability? Ida, for refusing to give Karen and Tom the closure they so desperately wanted? Should I have handled things differently? Or was I right to protect my peace and happiness from people who only ever brought me down? Wow, I didn't expect my original post to gain so much attention. Thank you all for your overwhelming support, advice, and validation. It's been truly heartwarming to read through your comments with David. Your words have reinforced that I made the right decisions both on my wedding day and with how I've chosen to handle the situation. David especially has been grateful for all the encouragement. We've had long conversations about everything that's happened, and your perspectives have helped keep us grounded during such a chaotic time. To give you all some clarity on a few things that kept popping up in the comments, yes, we are looking into reinstating the restraining order against both Tom and Karen. After the stunt Karen pulled at the wedding, our lawyer has been working diligently to extend the order. We want to ensure that there are no loopholes or chances for either of them to try something like this again, and we're not taking any risks when it comes to our safety or peace of mind. Alongside that, we've increased security measures at our home and even at our workplaces. David has been absolutely amazing through all of this, supporting every precaution we've decided to take. He's been by my side through every meeting with lawyers and security experts, making sure we're doing everything we can to protect ourselves. As for Karen, yes, she was arrested after violating the restraining order at the wedding. It was a surreal moment when the police finally took her away, but it also marked the start of a legal battle I never thought I'd have to face again. She spent the night in jail and was released on bail the following day. We've decided to press charges and there's now a court date set for next month. The entire situation is exhausting, but I know it's the right thing to do. Letting her get away with what she did would only enable her further. It's time that she faces the consequences of her actions. Many people have asked how Karen even found out about the wedding given that we had been so careful. The answer is both frustrating and unfortunate. A distant relative who wasn't fully aware of the situation happened to see our wedding announcement in the local paper and mentioned it to Karen in passing. It was an innocent mistake, but it triggered this entire chain of events. We've since had a long, difficult conversation with that relative explaining the full context of why Karen and Tom are no longer in my life. They were horrified to realize the role they played, though unintentionally, in setting this all off, and they've been very apologetic since. It's a reminder of how easily information can slip out no matter how careful you try to be. One of the most common suggestions I received was to seek therapy. I want to clarify that I've been in therapy for quite some time now. Ever since I left Tom, it has been one of the most valuable tools in my healing process, helping me work through the trauma of that relationship and everything that came after. It's given me a space to unpack the emotional abuse I endured, and it's helped me regain my sense of self-worth. Continuing therapy is definitely part of my plan as we navigate this next chapter. Now for a small but important update on what's happened since the wedding. The very next day, as David and I were preparing to leave for our honeymoon, we received an unexpected and alarming call from my parents. Apparently, Tom had shown up at their house out of the blue. He was demanding to know where I was, slurring his words and clearly intoxicated. When my parents refused to give him any information, things escalated quickly. Tom became aggressive and belligerent, yelling at them and even trying to force his way into their home. My parents, who have always been incredibly patient and supportive, were left with no choice but to call the police to have him removed from the property. Hearing this left me shaken. I had cut off all communication with Tom years ago, but this was the first time he had ever taken such a direct and hostile step toward my family. It was terrifying to think about how desperate and unpredictable he had become. This incident only strengthened our resolve to keep our distance and continue with legal action. We've now postponed our honeymoon, choosing instead to focus on making sure that we are secure, safe, and fully protected from any further incidents. Tom's appearance at my parents' house was a wake-up call that the situation with him isn't over yet, and we need to remain vigilant. Despite all of this, there have been some good things in the aftermath of the wedding. The outpouring of support from our friends, family, and even people I hadn't been close with in years has been overwhelming. It's been incredibly touching to see how many people have rallied around us, offering kind words, help and reassurance. It's moments like these that make me grateful for the community I have around me now. These are the people I almost lost when I was with Tom, the ones who were pushed away by Karen's manipulations and Tom's emotional abuse. Having them in my life now, especially during this difficult time, has been a reminder of how far I've come and how much I've gained since walking away from that toxic relationship. David and I are taking things one day at a time. We're determined not to let Tom or Karen's actions overshadow our happiness or derail the life we've worked so hard to build. We're focusing on each other, on the life we're creating together, and on keeping ourselves safe from their influence. There's still a long road ahead, especially with the upcoming court case, but we're ready to face whatever comes next together. I'll update you all again if there are any significant developments. In the meantime, thank you again for your continued support. It truly means the world to us. Update 2. I never imagined I'd be back here so soon with another update, but the past few days have been nothing short of a whirlwind. What unfolded has been both dramatic and emotionally draining, but it's also given me clarity in ways I didn't expect. It all started 2 days ago when I received a call from an unknown number. Typically, I wouldn't have answered, especially given the events that recently took place, but something compelled me to pick up. On the other end of the line was Karen, hysterical and barely coherent. Through her frantic sobs, I managed to piece together what had happened over the past few days. Since the wedding, Tom had apparently spiraled into a deep depression. According to Karen, he had been drinking excessively, locking himself in his apartment and refusing any attempts at contact. Karen, deeply worried about her son's state of mind, had taken to checking on him daily, desperate to pull him out of the darkness. The situation escalated on the day Karen called me. She had gone to Tom's apartment and found him unconscious on the floor, surrounded by empty liquor bottles and several prescription pill containers. Panic-stricken, she called an ambulance and Tom was rushed to the hospital. The doctors were able to stabilize him, but his condition remained critical. Karen was calling me to beg for my help. She insisted that Tom needed me, that I was the only one who could bring him back from the brink. She pleaded with me to come to the hospital, claiming that my presence might give Tom the will to recover. It was as if she believed I held some magical power to fix what had been broken for so long. I was stunned, completely blindsided by her desperation. My instinct to help collided with the harsh reality that this was not my responsibility anymore. The guilt that she had once used to manipulate me crept up, but this time, I wasn't going to let it overwhelm me. I knew I needed to protect myself, and I knew that this was yet another attempt by Karen to pull me back into the toxic cycle I had fought so hard to escape. After a long conversation with David and my therapist, I made the incredibly difficult decision to go to the hospital, not for Tom and not for Karen, but for myself. I realized if I didn't go, I would never have true closure. This wasn't about saving Tom. It was about closing that chapter of my life on my own terms once and for all. When I arrived at the hospital, the scene was chaotic. Karen was pacing frantically in the waiting room, her eyes swollen and bloodshot from crying. The moment she saw me, she rushed over, clearly expecting some kind of emotional reunion. But I maintained my distance. I had to. My presence there was for my own healing, not for some sort of apology or reconciliation. As I stood there, I felt a strange calm wash over me. For years, Karen and Tom had poured me into their emotional games, expecting me to fix things that were never mine to fix. But now, looking at Karen, I knew that this was the end of that. I made it clear that my presence didn't mean that we were suddenly all okay. I was there to let her know once and for all that I was done with their drama. Tom's current state was tragic.